Begin the current Daf, Mesech Gitin Daf Tezvav. We begin like a third through the Daf, basically starting the second parak in Mesech Gitin parak Hamevi Get Tinyana, which there was the first Hamevi Get, which spoke about bringing a get from Din Siyam, and then our Mishnah continues on this theme about a shliach bringing a get from Chutz La'aretz. Shiur corresponds to Kazakh and Cheskel, turn to Daf Hashem, joining today's Daf. So in today's Daf is just a lot of variations of. We started the first parak with Hamevi Get Din Siyam, and he says, in our Mishnah we discuss what happens if he says, B'fani nechtav, but not b'fani nechtam, or b'fani nechtam, but not b'fani nechtav, or b'fani nechtav kulai, b'fani nechtam chetze, meaning I saw the whole writing, but I only saw half the signing. B'fani nechtam chetze, b'fani nechtam kulai, I saw the whole signing, but only half the writing. Now, regarding this case of b'fani nechtam kulai, I saw the whole writing, but I only saw half the signing, which means say one of the two witnesses. So the Gemara is going to have many different interpretations on that when he only saw one of the witnesses. So what happens regarding the second witness? Even if, let's say, two other witnesses will testify, okay, you didn't see that other half, we could testify that we know his signature, even that won't work. Or him and another person, even though him himself would be valid, but him and another person won't be valid. He says, I am the second witness. Meaning, it's hard to say what it means. He doesn't say b'fani nechtam on that, which is interesting, but he's saying b'fani nechtam chetzai, and he says, I am the second witness. As long as he's not saying b'fani nechtam kulai, even that might not be valid. Then we're getting into discussion, because we're talking about halves, so we're getting the whole discussion regarding halves in many different areas of halacha. One of them being, let's say, the halachas of mechitza. So if you have mechitza chamisha, if you have, let's say, a ditch 5 tvachim high, and then you have a wall on top of that 5 tvachim high, if that would work for the halachas of mechitza, or yadayim taras lachatzayin, if you can purify hands also in halves, which the Gemara is going to explain what exactly is that case of halves. So begin the current Daf, the second parak, Hamevi Get. Says the Mishnah, Hamevi Get from Din Siyam. So as we opened up in the Masechta, we said if you bring a get from Din Siyam, you have to say b'fani nechtam, b'fani nechtam. What happens if you don't say the whole statement? Rather, v'amay b'fani nechtam, it says, okay, in front of me it was written, I saw it when the Sefer was writing it, avalei b'fani nechtam, but I wasn't there when it was signed. Or, that was case number one. Case number two, b'fani nechtam. Before me it was signed, I saw the witnesses sitting down and signing, avalei b'fani nechtam, but it wasn't written in front of me. Or case number three, b'fani nechtam kulai. Okay, look, in front of me the whole thing was written, or b'fani nechtam chetzai. In front of me half of it was signed, meaning only one of the two witnesses did I see when they were signing. Or case number four, b'fani nechtam chetzai. No, half of it was written in front of me, or b'fani nechtam kulai, but the whole thing was signed in front of me. Any one of these four cases is going to be invalid. Now, says the Mishnah further, what happens if echad ayim b'fani nechtam? One person says, in front of me was written. Ve'echad ayim b'fani nechtam, and another person says, in front of me was signed. Pasla is going to be invalid. So Rashi explains, because the Gemara is going to discuss this, if the get was being delivered by one person who is bringing the get, and the second person who was there, because we said one guy said b'fani nechtam and the other guy said b'fani nechtam, was not his shliach by bringing it, okay, so that's why it's invalid, because it's regarding the shliach that the Rabbanan required for him to say both of them, and the shliach is only saying half of it. Now, according to the one that says in the Gemara on the next daf, that actually is talking about when both of them were shluchim, even so it's going to be possible. Why? Because ultimately, since you're saying, one guy saying b'fani nechtav, and the other guy saying b'fani nechtam, so you only have one witness on the chasima, and he's not testifying on the writing, that shliach is only testifying on the chasima. That could be confused with kim shtaras di alma, as we said in the first paragraph of Gimel and Aleph. You have one guy testifying on the signatures, that looks like kim shtaras di alma. Now, generally, when you also say with them b'fani nechtav, so you're not going to get confused, and that's why we actually explained for Rava, who says the whole idea is kim shtaris, is, so he says, I aslach luf. He says, no, because you're saying also b'fani nechtav. But here, when only one guy is saying b'fani nechtam, so therefore it's going to be possible. Next case, says the Mishnah, what happens if shnayim oim b'faneinu nechtav? Two people say, in front of us it was written, the echad, which is a third person, oimer, he says b'fanei nechtam. In front of me it was signed. So here also possible, like Rashi explained, for the same reasoning. You only have one witness on the chasima, even though you have three total people, two people on the ksiva, doesn't make it that one guy who's talking about the chasimas, he's only talking about the chasima, no ksiva, and that's aslach luv b'kim shtaras d'alma. Rabbi Yehuda says it's going to be valid. Why? Because since ultimately you require other witnesses for the writing, whether it be him or someone else, Okay, then it's not going to be any more aslach lufe. Aslach lufe is the only thing we're having is a one witness on the kiyum chasamas and nothing else. That's aslach lufe. We're not going to come as, although he's only talking about the chasima, it doesn't make a difference. We still have witnesses on the kasiva, which Rashi brings. The Gemara tells us that Yehuda disagreed on the previous halacha we just mentioned also. When one says b'fani nechtav and one says b'fani nechtam, even though it's not two, it's one, it's also not aslach lufe, because ultimately you have one guy talking about the kasiva, even though you have only one guy in the chasima. But it's not the same thing as Kim Shtar Zama. So that's the veg in the Kesiva. We don't talk about the writing of the document. Since by get we're required the writing, the talk about the writing, it's not going to be confused with Kim Shtar as the Alma. So Yehuda validates this case and the case right before it too. The last case of the Mishnah, let's say one guy says in front of me it was written, and two people say it was signed in front of us. Then kasha is going to be valid. The Gemara on Daf Yomi is going to explain why when you have two people talking about the chasima, is that going to be valid? But first the Gemara says, opening in regards to our whole Mishnah over here, Hasulamali, why do you need this Mishnah at all? We already said this once in the beginning of the Masechta. So I may be getting some brings a get from overseas. You have to say in front of him is written, in front of him is signed. And every one of these cases is a deviation from that. You said only writing, not signing, not writing, half, this, half. So what do you need to have our Mishnah for? So no, Ima, he only had the Mishnah in the beginning of Masechta. I mean, I would have said Tzarech. Yeah, you need it. But if you don't say it's going to be valid after the fact, no, it's going to be possible. Like we actually learned from Meir, whatever. It's not going to be valid even after the fact. Now, one of the cases the Mishnah brought was if the guy says b'fanei nechtav chetzyoy. That what? Oh, he's saying that we didn't know. I hear. So maybe we could have just started by those cases. You could have left out the original four. I hear. And maybe that's what the Gemara is saying. So the Gemara brings one of the cases we said in the Mishnah was b'fanei nechtav chetzyoy. In front of me was written half, b'fanei nechtam kulai. But in front of me I saw the whole signing. So pas is going to be invalid. So the Gemara wonders, wait a second. Hi chetzyoy. When you say you only saw half it being written, which half was that? Because if you say that he saw the first half being written, then it shouldn't be possible. Because Rabbi Shloimy says, and we quoted this on Daf Yomi at Beis, which doesn't mean that you only wrote one line lishma. It means, as we explained over there, the shliach only saw one line of it, which that's actually where the name of the man and the woman and the date is. Even though that's the only thing he saw, you don't have to see any of the other writing because that's the primary text of what's written lishma. So Elam Ravashi, he just clarifies his chetzi achron. When this case of puzzle of b'fanei nechtav chetzyoy means in front of it was written the second half, not the first half. So therefore, it's going to be puzzle. Okay, but the main action here is on this next case. The Mishnah said b'fanei nechtav kuloi. Okay, I saw the whole writing, but a b'fanei nechtav chetzyoy in front of me was signed only half.
What's wrong with seeing only the last half
of the writing?
I think I didn't want to mention that at the end of the get that
The shita achrayna, right? That's by mumminess you do that. By get, I don't know if that would even be valid anyway because you weren't there by the first half of the writing, which is the primary part of the get. But that's by mumminess generally that you have to go over the b'shita achrayna. But yeah, the first line is still critical for the lishma being written for the name and the title. What is it? Yeah, but I'm saying so. This is where the top line of the get is where it has the shema ish va'ish v'azman. Now, the Mishnah had said b'fanei nechtav kula. In front of me was written the whole thing. B'fanei nechtam chetzia. So I only saw one of the two witnesses, possibly possible. So the Gemara comes up with many different clarifications in this halacha. Amar Rav Chizda. So Rashi explains, Rav Chizda is not really coming to explain the halacha of the Mishnah per se, and to explain that this is what the Mishnah is talking about. He's just adding on his own svara, his own logic. And he wants to say chiddush. That what? Va'afil shnayim, even if two people from the street, me'idim achasim ziyadjeni, they testify, look, you only saw shliach, one of the two, that's called b'fanei nechtam chetziyai. You only saw one of the signatures. Good, don't worry. We, the two people from the street, we recognize this other signature, which the shliach is not testifying on. No, still passing me puzzle. He says, well, my time, what's the reason? Why would it be puzzle? What do you mean? The shliach is believed, and he said on one of them, and now we have two eidim on the second one. So the Gemara says an interesting svara. Oy kula b'kima get, says Rav Chizda, either you have to do the whole get by witnesses that testify on the signatures of the witnesses, oy kula b'takazacham, or totally with the rabbinic institution of the testimony of the shliach, who the chum believe in, like two. But you can't do chatzi, you can't do a half lemon, half lime, you can't do that half and half. Which Tais actually brings a svara, because he says that the shliach is not going to be so careful when the whole testimony is not really relying on him. Which is a good svara, because we said, why do we believe him? Because meidik dayik, because he knows he's going to have to be grilled by the dayanim, and he's going to have to know. I'm only saying half. I don't have to take the whole achrayas. So it says Tais, that's the svara in Rav Chizda, why he holds that it's got to be either all or nothing. But Rava doesn't like it, and Maskevla Rava. Rava asks, and he says, Mi kamidi, is there really such a thing? The ilo amarchad, if the shliach, who's one person, would say that I recognize it, kasher would be valid. And Rashi puts out, which Taisus discusses, that even if he didn't say b'fani nechtam, because the Gemara in the first paragraph of Gimel Merav says, even if he just says Yodeani, I know he's believed in the first sugi over there, kasher would be kasher. How's that possible that if the shliach himself, even not even b'fani nechtam, would one person would say, I know it, it'd be kasher, and now when there's two witnesses, it's going to be invalid? What? What do you mean? Meaning when the what? Oh, I mean, no, yeah, and Tais said, Rabbi Savad become daik shop. Yeah. No, but Tais doesn't. No, I'm saying Tais says that Rabbi doesn't hold up what Rav Chizda is saying, that when he's half and half, there's not going to be daik. Yeah, and that's the machlokes. But Rabbi holds it would be medaik, and if that's the case, so then if one guy himself would be believed to say, then two people for sure should believe to say. If it doesn't like what Rav Chizda is saying, that if two people come along, go in because it's not true. The guy said, I know one of the signatures, and then you have two witnesses on the other one. Rabbi says that would be kasher. But if you want to say a chiddush, says Rava, I'll tell you a different chiddush you could say. Elama Rabba, he says, afila, I'll tell you a different afila. Not the afila you're saying. The afila you're saying is not true. Two people coming along, they will be believed on the second signature. But as Gitin Daf and Beis, a different chiddush is like this. Who, if you have the shliach, the acher, and someone else from the street with him, they testify on the signatures of the second witness that he didn't say b'fanei nechtam on. Now, if the only one that would testify on that would be the shliach, even if you would say Yodeani, it would be kasher. But now that there's someone else actually with him, which is fascinating, pasal is going to be pasal. I tell him, what's the reason? So the Gemara says, I'll tell you why. It says, Rava, it's going to be confused with a generic validation of a document. Meaning, for example, as Rashi explains, let's say there's two witnesses signed on a document, and one of them dies. And one of them comes along and says, okay, look, this is my signature, and this other one, my friend, he died, is his handwriting. Now, we combine someone else from the street with him to testify on the handwriting of the second witness who died. Now, the Gemara in the second parak Daf Yomi says that's not a valid kiyum until you have two other unrelated people from the street to testify on that dead person's signature. Why? What's wrong? Why can't he's believed to say on his own signature, and then him and someone else should be able to validate because there are two witnesses on that person's signature? No, because v'kanafik nichi riva comes out that minus a quarter, meaning 2/3, is going to be extracted the mamina of the money apum dechatzada based on the testimony of one witness, because he is himself believed on his own, together with the other random person from the street on the other person's signature. The Gemara tells us on Daf Chaf and Beis over there that a person is believed to say, this is my handwriting. So that's half the testimony. If he's going to combine to testify on his friend's signature with someone else, that's 3/4 of the testimony based on his word. Now the Torah tells us in the Vam Yud Zayin Apishnayim, it says based on two witnesses Yakum Davar, which sounds like half has to be based on what he's saying and half has to be on what the other person's saying. Now, Rashi explains by get also, if you're going to say b'fanei nechtem chatziyai, you're going to be believed like two on the signature that you did say b'fanei nechtem on, because you're a shliach. Now the second half of the signing, meaning the other witness, he's going to combine with someone else to validate it for the Kim Shtaris. So although by get we're not concerned because anyways we validate on based on what he's saying, because the Rabbanan believe him like two, but because of a Gzeira of Shar Shtaris, if you let him do this, it's going to be confused with a regular Shtar that you might do the same thing, and that's a problem with it, because that's going to be 3/4. Here, you can do the whole thing. But even if you would do it yourself, it would be okay. But since you're doing it with another person, it actually makes it worse, because now it's going to be confused with Kim Shtaris D'Alma. So that says Rava, I'll tell you a Chiddush, that would be invalid. But, Maskevla Rav Ashi. Rav Ashi doesn't like what Rava said, because he also has a similar type of a questioning. Mikamidis, there's such a thing, if he would finish up the whole statement of the second signature by himself, kasher be kasher, meaning like Rashi says, even if he says Yediani, hashtek echad b'adei pasal, now that another person with him is going to be pasal, how's that possible? So rather, Elam Rav Ashi says a different svar, a different Ella, a different afila. So the afila, even if he says, Anihu eid sheni, I am the second witness, meaning that is validating the get, like other shtaris, that a person's believed to say, this is my signature, pasal is going to be pasal. My time, what's the reason? It says the Gemara, like what Rav Chizda said, rather, it has to be either totally with kiyum, which you have the witnesses validating, being validated, or with the kanzacham of saying b'fanei nachtem. Now, Taisus says, if you're going to say, is there such a thing that if he would say b'fanei nachtem it would be kosher, because he says, I am the eight chain, it's going to be possible, meaning the same question everyone asked on everyone else, he's asking on the last Amoyer too. How could it be worse? So he says, it appears to the read like the way it says in Yerushalmi, when he says, I am the second witness, he becomes Negeya Bedavar, Negeya Beidusa, because it looks like that the reason why he's coming to testify on the second signature is that his edus should be valid with his own signing. So it's like a Negeya Bedavar. It's an Echab Gechasman. So now you're already biased, so that's why it would actually be worse when you're saying Anihu Eid Sheni.
If Rav Ashi came to say that there's even a bigger chiddush.
Not a bigger chiddush. Each one is really saying a lesser chiddush than the other one, because Rav Chizda wants to say the biggest one of all. Even have two witnesses. They say, come on, two witnesses, how's it not going to work if one works? So Rava said a lesser chiddush. He says, no, not two other ones. Him and someone else is on the second one. And then Rav Ashi says, the smallest one, he says, no, it's Taki him himself. And he's saying, Anihu Eid Sheni. I don't know if that's lesser. There's actually Rashi discusses if Rav Ashi and Rava are less or they're the same. But he's not necessarily saying a bigger chiddush. Now, Taish just ends up with one point. He says, if that's the real reason, because in the Negei Beidusai, so why does Rav Ashi's word say, Oy kulu v'kim aget, the reason why it's invalid is because of that? It should be invalid because he's Negei Beidusai. So Taish says, no, because that's not real a full-fledged reasoning, because if not for the reason of Oy kulu v'kim aget, Oy kulu v'kim chashtaras, it's not really Negei Beidusai. It's not really Negei Beidusai. It's not a bias of whatever you signed, and now you're just saying that you're verifying on the other signature. So it's really betzir of both of them that Rav Ashi says a chiddush that if he says I'm the second witness, it's not going to work, even though if he said b'fanei nechtem, it would work. But now the Gemara asks Tnan from our Mishnah on essentially Rav Chizda. So we had three chidushim, each one didn't like the other one's chiddush. So we learned our Mishnah like this: b'fanei nechtav kula. In front of me, the whole thing was written. B'fanei nechtem chetzioi pasel. But if in front of me, half it was signed, it's going to be pasel. Not really the case that we what? No. So this is the case that we're discussing all along. B'fanei nechtem chetzioi is he saw one of the two witnesses being signing. That's really the case that was the springboard off of it. But now the Gemara is going to bring it in and try to prove not like Rav Chizda, because either chetzi hechadami. So okay, so the other half, what actually happened? Meaning, if you think no one's testifying on the other signature, seriously, you need to tell me that's going to be possible? Hashtiv, if you already said in the Mishnah, one of the cases in the Mishnah was, if one of them says, Befanai nechtav, and someone says, Befanai nechtam, meaning, and that's a case of the kamasera kulik. You have one guy testifying the whole writing, you have another person that says on the whole signing. He saw both signatures. And still, pasal is going to be invalid. You have to tell me when the guy only saw half of the signing? Why would you say that? So the Gemara wants to infer something. Ella, obviously, you have to say from this superfluous, what's called Mishnah Yisera, the superfluous case of the Mishnah, must be telling us a Chiddush. Isn't it telling us what I wouldn't know from the case of when one guy says B'fani Nechtam and one guy knows B'fani Nechtam? Well, what case would that be? Oh, that's, for example, where the second half, there is Eidus. But, the wise apostle, Oy Rava, Oy Ravashi. I mean, either like Rava, where it's the shliach himself with another person from the street, or like Rav Ashi, where he says, I'm the second witness, and even so it's going to be possible. But Lafuka Midin Rav Chizda. But obviously he's coming to exclude from Rav Chizda. Why is that? So Rashi explains. Since the Mishnah must be telling us Epes HaChiddush, because what are you telling me a case that I already would know from a Kabbalah Chayim, from one says B'fani Nechtam, one says B'fani Nechtam. If you're only saying B'fani Nechtam Chatzia, of course it's going to be possible. No. I'm only saying I saw half of it, but there's something else regarding the other signature too. But it doesn't tell us what chiddush that case is talking about. Obviously, you cannot what's called tafas meruba. You can't pick the bigger chiddush that's not explicit. For example, the case of Rav Chizda is the biggest chiddush. Chizda says two witnesses come along and say that the second. That's come on, it's like the biggest key you can get. No, it must be telling us a smaller chiddush. Either the case of Rava, where it's him and someone else, or Rav Ashi, which I'm the second witness. Which that's where you don't really see any chiddush, it's only from this extra case. And if we're going to tell you something, we're going to tell you the smaller chiddush, then it's not superfluous anymore. But if it was Rav Chizda's case, you should have told us explicitly, which Rashi discusses what you would bring up, that if you're going to say maybe it's also excluding from Rava, and it's only going to tell us the case of Rav Ashi, which is the smallest chiddush, so it's not true. Rava is not any bigger chiddush than Rav Ashi, because by other documents, it's possible when you take out 3/4 by one person. So if by get also, it would make sense to make it possible because of other stars that it doesn't get confused. And this that we're not goyzer by the shliach himself when he says b'fani nechtam, that's because the Rabbanan made a hecker where they required him to testify in the ksiva so that it doesn't come to get confused, like we said in Daf Gimel. So essentially, Rashi is saying that Rav Chizda is the one out, but Rava and Rav Ashi could be the case. So isn't that a contradiction on Rav Chizda? And Rav Chizda says no. Because according to your reasoning that you want to say, okay, what does the Mishnah need? This case must be superfluous to tell me a chiddush, and the fact that it doesn't say must be that it doesn't hold of my chiddush, because why didn't it say it? It's only saying the lesser chiddush. Then I'm going to ask you the following question. There's another case in the Mishnah that says b'fani nechtav. In front of me was written avaloi b'fani nechtam, but it wasn't signed in front of me. Lamali. What do you need that for? What's it teaching us? If b'fani nechtav kulai and b'fani nechtam chetzia is possible. So you're not testifying on the Chasimis at all. Do I need to tell you that case? Ella, rather, says Rav Chizda, obviously you're going to answer that the Mishnah, each case is only teaching the case itself. And if you're going to ask, okay, say only the later cases, not and for sure I know the first cases, yeah, but that's what's called loizu avzu katani. Not only this, but I'll tell you even the bigger chiddush, even this, that's the way the Tana normally talks. First he says like the more simpler cases, like I didn't even see the signing at all. And then he adds on even the bigger chiddush. And he says, not only when there was no one that could testify on this witnesses at all, but even the case when he could testify regarding one of the two, what's called b'fani nechtam chetzia, it's still going to be possible. So if that's what you have to say in the other case in the Mishnah, it says Rav Chizda, sahachinami. So here also regarding me, regarding my halacha. The truth is, when you say b'fani nechtam chetzia, the Mishnah is not coming to tell us any chiddush. Because if it would be telling us chiddushim, it would have said my chiddush. That even when two other witnesses are on the other signature, it would still be invalid. So what's the Mishnah teaching us? The halacha itself. Like we said, that no one actually said anything regarding the second witness. But then you had a question, he says, well, hello, if you said one guy said b'fani nechtam, one guy said b'fani nechtam kuloi, so isn't it a kol shekain? Yeah, most definitely that when you say in the ratio, you don't need to have, if you said that first, you wouldn't have to say this. But now that the Tana is saying in the ratio one case, it adds on, and it says that lo yizu, not only this case where you have no one that signed, that no one could testify in the other half of the signature, but abzu katani, that even if when you're going to testify on the whole kasiva, and this guy's going to testify on the whole kasiva, it's going to be possible because you don't have one person that's saying b'fani nechtav and b'fani nechtam. So it's not difficult enough because it's what's called lo yizu abzu katani, because even you have to admit that this is cases that no chidushim. So it's saying, yeah, this and even this. So you're right, there's no chidushim being said in this case, because if it was, it would have said my chiddush, and it's not a raya that, it's superfluous and saying the smaller chiddush, it's not a stira. But now the Gemara gets into interesting conversation like Rashi tells us, just because we said before that you got to pick and choose. Either it's totally kul b'kim aget, which is b'fanei nechdem, or kul b'kim shtaros. You have two witnesses verifying the signatures. You can't do half and half. So therefore, we say also now what's called tzirufim regarding combining. Could you do half and half? So Rav Chizda says regarding the halachas of Shabbos, you need to have a mechitza that's 10 tefachim high or 10 tefachim deep to create a rishus hayachid. Now, let's say you have gidud chamisha. Let's say you have a ditch that's 5 tefachim deep, umechitza, and then you have walls surrounding it with a partition of chamisha 5 tefachim high. Says Rav Chizda, ein mitzdarfen. They do not combine, like this picture illustrates, to be inside of it rishus hayachid because it's achi hey oikula b'mechitza, oikula b'gidud. You can't have both. It's got to be either ditch, which is depth, or mechitza, which is height. You can't combine 5 and 5 to make a partition of 10 tefachim to make it rishus hayachid. However, Darish Mirimer disagrees. Says no, gidud chamisha mechitza hey mitzdarfen. The wall 5 and the ditch 5 will combine. And says the Gemara mitzdarfen halacha is like Mirimer that it does combine. But now we get into an interesting conversation into another related idea about halves. Baye Ilfa. Ilfa had the following question: Yadayim tahiras lechatzan. Can you purify hands in halves, or in tahiras lechatzan, or does not get purified in halves? Says the Gemara, Hechadem, what's the case talking about? So, and the Gemara goes through a few different options. If it's talking about where two people are, he's like, oh, there's only that much water. The counselor brought back one, vashtepel of water. So, two people are going to wash from the same revius, which each one's going to have a half of the shiur of revius. So is that the question? What it means halves, half of revius for Reuven, half of revius for Shimon. Says, man, that can be his question because what not? It's an explicit Mishnah Masechet Zidayim. Mishnah says, it was known as Shir HaTorah by my Bart. I spoke about this. Miravius, that if you have a vessel that holds a revius full of water, you can wash your hands for one and even two people. Because since originally this cup had a shiur, and it's what's called shiur HaTorah, and this is the Gemara in Chulun Daf Kaf Zayin, Amanalva explains it. So that's not a problem. So that wouldn't be Ilfa's question because it's explicit Mishnah. You could wash from half revius if it started from a full revius. Okay, so what's his question? So
each pours a half revius on their hands.
Right.
Not like that they pour them
Right.
revius on both.
Right, so that's discussed over there, right? But it potentially would be even one guy washing and the other way. But that's discussed over there in the beginning of Sech Zidayim. Two guys have their hands at the same time. Actually, Taisa has an interesting discussion here also regarding pouring double the amount on one hand. The Shaila is in the second what the answer is going to be on. So the Gemara says no. The Kamashi Chada Chada Yada. We're talking about where he washed one hand and then he washed the other hand. Is that the question? Meaning you're not washing both hands at the same time. Says no, that can't be. But none, which is actually a brisa. If someone washes one hand from a vessel that he's pouring on his hands the way the Chacham instituted, the achas peshtifa, one he's actually dipping into the river that has 40 sah, yadav tyrus. You see, his hands are going to be tar. So Taisa says, Rashi seems to explain that, you see that even though one is done with natila, one is done with shtifa, so you see, that halves is good. So Taisa, how are you answering from here when you wash one hand and then you wash the other hand? Maybe here it's talking about that you did it both at the same time. You dipped one hand into the river, one hand that was being washed. Well, maybe that's okay. What does it have to do with one after the other? So Taisa says for Rashi that the Gemara holds there's no chiluk. It's logical that if one after the other wouldn't be effective, same thing is at the same time wouldn't be effective, even if you're actually washing both, one from one vessel, one from another vessel, that wouldn't be okay. So in other words, if you're not doing one simultaneous situation, that's how it would seem like from Rashi that the Gemara is answering. Rabbi Tam has a very different interpretation based on the different girsa, which is talking about regarding one hand that we see. But for Rashi, the Gemara basically just said, no, you can't say washing one and then the other because it's clear that that's going to be okay too. No, so it says the Gemara, we're talking about, no, actually where he washed half of his hand in halves, meaning the mitzvah of Natila is up until the wrist. He washed half of the hand first, dried it, and then he washed the second half of the hand. That's his question. Says the Gemara, that's his question? But Rami de Yadayim ain't hands cannot be purified in halves. So what's the question? No, lo tzricha deika mashka tefech. We're talking about where there's a little moist liquid. When he washed the second half of his hand, the first half wasn't totally dry yet. It was still a little bit moist. Says Gemara, okay, who cares that his hand's a little moist? But number we learned in the Mishnah Masechet Taharos, Gitin Daf is a Tezayin and Aleph that says, and this is actually complicated sugis, but we're just touching it. Taisa goes to the whole arichas regarding mikvahs, with what type of holes you have to connect mikvahs. But anitzik, which is a flow, vakatafres, which is like a incline on a mountain, which it's very steep incline. Umashka tefeach, or if you have moist liquid, ein a chibur, it's not a connection. Loy tuma. What does that mean for that? So Rashi says, for example, let's say someone's pouring from a pure vessel into an impure vessel. And then you have the flow that's connecting the liquid of the two vessels. That's not considered a connection to contaminate the liquids in the upper vessel. So too by ketafres, when you have the slanty mountain, if let's say you have liquids that are going through a board that are on an incline, and the bottom ones are attached to tumah, the upper ones are not going to be tummy, even though there's this flow. So to be, let's say you have a long trough, and you have two ends have liquid. One's tummy, one's tar, and you have this moist liquid that's connecting these two liquids. It's not a connection to mimitama the tire. And also below the tara. Regarding mikvahs, for example, let's say you have two mikvahs, where each one of them doesn't have 40 saw, and then you have this like little flow of liquid between them connecting them. It's not a connection, which that Tosh has a whole arichas on that regarding that halacha, what's considered a connection of mikvahs. But be that as it may, moist liquid's not going to help. So what's the question? How could that be matar? We're talking about this liquid, so much liquid that if you touch the moist liquid, you could then make something else moist from the liquid that you touched. That was his question. That's how moist your hand was after you dried it. So would that maybe combine? That we also learned. The Brisa says tefech latfiach is chibur, it's connection for tumah and tahara. As Rashi explained, the Gemara assumes that the same thing is for netilas yadayim. That's considered as if you did it together. So the Gemara says, no, that's not a raya, and that's why Ilfa had a question on this case. Because Dilma, maybe this brisa in that Mishnah that says that it's a chibur when it's tefech latfiach is le'inim k'vayis and Rabbi Hudahi because of good achas. That's why Rashi explains. The Torah says arichas on that also. But that, in other words, regarding the tila, you could ask a question. Says, well, maybe that is considered halves, or maybe not, because you cannot bring a raya from the connection of the mikvahs as a proof over here. Because we're not talking about connections. Good achas is a very different discussion than that of the halacha of is it one natila or two natilas. Because Antay says a little bit more about regarding your mamish, your leg is inside, it's connected. When it's moist, tavech b'nas latfiach is that maybe it's considered as one unit. When your hands, when you washed it, meaning the case of tavech latfiach is based on the principle of good achas. So then we see it literally as if he's inside, as if the water's inside the mikvah. That would not tell us regarding the halacha natilas yadayim. Why? Because now we're learning the Mishnah Masechet mikvahs that says mikvah shish ba'arbam samuchuvanas. If you have a mikvah that's exactly 40 saw, which is the measurement of a mikvah, not more, not less. Two people went to the mikvah. So in parentheses it says they're both in the same time. It's going to be tar. But it's one after the other. Rishon tar b'sheni tama. The first one's tar, and the second one's going to be tame. Why? Because the mikvah is missing now after the first one left. Yehudami says, if the first one's legs are touching the water when the second one's tivling, then afar sheni tar, then even the second one's going to be tar. Why? Because it's as if the water on the first person is connected to the mikvah waters. So that's why it's going to be kosher regarding the case of the mikvah, because of good achas, because it's connected to the mikvah as a chibur. But says the Gemara, that wouldn't tell us anything regarding netilas yadayim. That wouldn't say that as if it's one netilas yadayim when it's tefech b'nas latfiach. So therefore, even though when you see tefech b'nas latfiach as a chibur, that's Rabbi Yehuda, which according to the way it sounds like from Taisus is that means to say because that's the principle of good achas. That wouldn't tell us anything to the halacha of is that considered as if your natila is still here, present in the world. That's very different about connecting two things versus considering as if it's one natila. And that was Ilfa's question regarding if that halves of natila would be valid or not. I can get to anything. Those things.